Some bands get big, then get quiet, and eventually you realize you haven't heard their name in years. And when you try to figure out why, the answer is almost never simple. It's rarely one bad album or one breakup. It's usually a slow drift between what the band was doing and what the audience needed them to be. And by the time either side notices the gap, it's too late to close it. These are the 10 bands nobody's listening to anymore. And here's the truth behind the trend. Number 10, Nickelback.
Too long, too late.
Nickelback is on this list with the asterisk that they are technically still a band, still touring, and still capable of filling arenas in certain markets, particularly in Canada, where they remain genuinely popular, and in parts of Europe where the backlash narrative never achieved the same cultural traction it developed in the United States and United Kingdom. But in the dominant cultural conversation around rock music, Nickelback exists primarily as a punchline, and the transition from one of the best-selling rock acts in the world to the band that signals bad taste by association is genuinely interesting as a case study. The band, Chad Kroeger, Ryan Peake, Mike Kroeger, and Daniel Adair, had their commercial peak in the early 2000s. Silver Side Up, 2001, and The Long Road, 2003, produced some of the most played rock radio songs of the decade. How You Remind Me was, according to several analyses of airplay data, the most played song on both radio and television in the United States during the first decade of the 2000s. The band sold over 50 million albums globally by most estimates. By any commercial measure, they were one of the biggest rock acts in the world. The backlash began forming approximately 2005 to 2008 and intensified through the early 2010s. The specific critique, formulaic songs, emotionally shallow lyrics, a sound engineered for maximum radio impact, was not entirely inaccurate, but it also described the production approach of dozens of contemporaneous rock acts who did not receive the same concentrated cultural contempt. The question of why Nickelback specifically became the target of the joke, rather than any of their commercial peers, has been analyzed by music critics and cultural observers, and does not have a fully satisfying answer. What happened is that the band became a cultural shorthand. Disliking Nickelback became a signal of musical taste and self-presentation, which means the dislike was partly self-perpetuating. The joke about hating Nickelback was funnier the more widely it was understood, and the wider it spread, the more it functioned as genuine cultural positioning. Once a band occupies that position, it is nearly impossible to escape regardless of what they release. They have continued putting out albums and touring through the 2000s and into the 2020s, finding audiences in markets where the joke narrative never fully took root. Number 9, Creed. Creed's story runs parallel to Nickelback's in ways that are almost structurally identical, except that Creed had the additional complicating element of a public dissolution and eventual reunion that made their arc more theatrical. The band, Scott Stapp, Mark Tremonti, Scott Phillips, and Brian Marshall, sold approximately 35 million albums worldwide across their 3 studio albums in the late 1990s and early 2000s, making them one of the best-selling acts of that specific radio era. Their commercial peak was Human Clay, 1999, which reached number 1 on the Billboard 200 and went 8 times platinum in the United States, producing the singles that defined Christian-inflected post-grunge radio through the turn of the millennium. My Own Prison, 1997, had established the band's sound. Human Clay scaled it to arena rock dimensions. Weathered, 2001, continued the commercial momentum before the band's internal tensions became untenable. The critical reception throughout was dismissive. Rock critics characterized the music as derivative of Pearl Jam's sonic approach, Stapp's vocal delivery as theatrical rather than genuine, and the lyrical content, heavy with Christian spiritual imagery and personal struggle framing, as pretentious. The gap between the critical reception and the commercial response was as wide as it was for Hootie and the Blowfish, with considerably less good humor from Stapp than from Darius Rucker about how that gap was navigated publicly. Creed disbanded in 2004. Mark Tremonti formed Alter Bridge with former Creed members and Miles Kennedy as lead vocalist, which developed genuine critical credibility that Creed had never achieved. Tremonti's guitar work, which critics had always acknowledged even when dismissing the band, was finally framed by a different lead vocal personality. Stapp's solo career was troubled. The band's 2009 reunion produced Full Circle to mild commercial and critical response, and their 2023 reunion attracted nostalgia tour interest that confirmed the audience for their catalog remains intact, even if the cultural context for that catalog has changed considerably. Number 8. Linkin Park.
It starts with one thing, I don't know why.
Linkin Park is a more complicated entry than Nickelback or Creed, because the band had genuine musical evolution across their career, produced work that earned critical acknowledgement at points beyond their commercial peak, and experienced a tragedy that changed the nature of any conversation about their continuation. Chester Bennington died on July 20th, 2017, at the age of 41. The cause was suicide. He was one of the most distinctive vocalists of his generation, and his death was a loss that extended well beyond the band's fan base. The band's commercial peak was Hybrid Theory, 2000, one of the best-selling debut albums in history, with over 27 million copies sold, and Meteora, 2003, which continued the nu metal rap rock formula that defined Hybrid Theory.
All I know, time is a valuable thing.
Mike Shinoda's rapped verses over heavy guitars, Bennington's clean-to-screamed vocal dynamic, and the production density of the Rick Rubin overseen recordings made Linkin Park's early work sonically distinctive within the crowded early 2000s nu metal field. Minutes to Midnight, 2007, represented a deliberate move away from that formula, collaborating with Rick Rubin to produce a more conventional hard rock album that some fans found unsatisfying. The subsequent albums, 1,000 Suns, 2010, Living Things, 2012, The Hunting Party, 2014, and One More Light, 2017, each pursued a different creative direction, with One More Light being the most controversial.
I tried so hard and got so far.
A pop-oriented album that received significant fan backlash before Bennington's death, 2 months after its release, recontextualized both the album and the hostile response to it. After several years of no activity, the band announced a reconstituted version with new vocalist Emily Armstrong in 2024. The announcement generated an intensely complicated fan response. Support for the band's continuation, mixed with grief, skepticism, and principled objection to any continuation without Bennington. The active controversy suggests Linkin Park is not so much a band nobody's listening to as one whose future is actively contested by people who still care deeply about what the band meant.
It doesn't even matter.
Number 7. Matchbox 20.
Pick me up and dust me off.
Matchbox 20 had a remarkable run. 3 consecutive albums, Yourself or Someone Like You, 1996, Mad Season, 2000, and More Than You Think You Are, 2002, that sold tens of millions of copies worldwide and produced a run of radio singles that were essentially unavoidable during their commercial peak. Rob Thomas's vocal delivery, the band's melodic post-grunge sound, and their consistent ability to write songs that connected emotionally with a broad audience made them one of the most commercially reliable rock acts of the late 1990s and early 2000s. The band's trajectory after that peak involved a long hiatus, roughly 2004 to 2012, during which Rob Thomas pursued a successful solo career.
Be so complicated, just hold me in there.
His Lonely No More, 2005, was a significant hit, but the most commercially consequential Thomas moment was co-writing and providing lead vocals for Santana's Smooth, recorded in 1999 and dominating radio in 2000, winning 3 Grammy Awards, including Record of the Year and Song of the Year. The Grammys described the song as the most played song of the year. Thomas's name on a track without the Matchbox 20 context demonstrated that much of the band's appeal was concentrated in his specific vocal personality. The cultural positioning the band occupied in the 1990s has a specific modern equivalent. They are now a nostalgia act in the category alongside Third Eye Blind, Counting Crows, Semisonic, and other acts whose commercial peak is now more than 20 years in the past, and whose catalog retains active listeners who are now in their 40s and 50s. North, 2012, and Where the Light Goes, 2023, demonstrated that the band can still make records consistent with their established sound, and they tour consistently to audiences who respond warmly to that catalog. The truth behind the Matchbox 20 trend is one of the least dramatic on this list. They were a band whose sonic identity was of a specific moment. That moment passed, and the audience that loved them moved into a maintenance relationship with their catalog. That is not unusual. It is the standard career arc for rock bands that were very popular at a specific cultural moment and did not significantly reinvent themselves. Number 6. Hootie and the Blowfish. Hootie and the Blowfish had one of the more improbable commercial runs in rock history. Their debut album, Cracked Rear View, 1994, became the best-selling debut album in American history at the time of its release, selling over 21 million copies in the United States alone and over 16 million more internationally. The band, Darius Rucker, Mark Bryan, Dean Felber, and Jim Stoney were playing earnest, uncomplicated rock and roll at a moment when the prevailing critical establishment was obsessed with grunge's righteous angst and alternative rock's carefully maintained self-consciousness about sincerity. The critical reception was dismissive in near direct inverse proportion to the commercial response. The more the album sold, the more critics seemed to enjoy articulating why it wasn't particularly good. I've been looking for a girl like you. The band was too accessible, too cheerful, too willing to be liked for the critical apparatus of 1994 to take seriously. The commercial triumph and the critical contempt coexisted in a way that was genuinely unusual in its symmetry, and the band bore it with a specific kind of South Carolina good humor that probably frustrated the critics who expected more defensiveness. Fairweather Johnson, 1996, and Musical Chairs, 1998, sold respectably, but represented significant commercial decline from the extraordinary peak of Cracked Rear View. By the early 2000s, the band had stopped releasing music, and the individual members pursued other projects. Darius Rucker's subsequent country career is one of the more interesting reinvention stories in American popular music. He signed with Capitol Nashville in 2008 and released Learn to Live, which produced multiple country #1 singles and earned him the Grammy Award for Best New Artist in the Country category in 2009, more than 15 years into his professional career. The distinction between being a new artist in a genre rather than a new artist in the industry gave his country identity, genuine longevity, rather than nostalgia positioning. His success in Nashville effectively repositioned him as a working artist rather than a legacy figure, which is not the outcome most people who had followed him from the Hootie era expected. The 2019 group therapy tour, which reunited the original band, was one of the highest-grossing rock tours of the year, indicating that the nostalgic affection for the cracked rear-view era is entirely intact even if the band's ongoing presence in contemporary music conversations is limited. Number 5. Default. Default is the band on this list that the most people will need a moment to place, not because they were minor, but because their commercial moment was concentrated in a single radio hit before the band faded from the mainstream conversation almost entirely. The Vancouver-based quartet released Wasting My Time / Throwing My Life Away in 2001, with Wasting My Time becoming a significant rock radio hit that spent 17 consecutive weeks at number 1 on the Billboard Mainstream Rock Tracks chart, a record at the time of its achievement. The band, Dallas Smith, Dave Rosen, J. Far Phoebus, and Brian Rocky Theus, was part of the production framework that had successfully broken Nickelback and other post-grunge acts into radio dominance. Well, this is not for real, afraid to feel. Wasting My Time had all the characteristics of a song built for that format. The quiet verse into loud chorus dynamic, emotional directness in the lyrical content, the guitar tone and production density that defined early 2000s rock radio. The formula worked, the song worked, the album sold. The follow-up album, Elocation, 2003, had a harder time finding the same radio traction, and the music industry landscape was shifting beneath the band in ways that made replicating the first album's success increasingly difficult. The specific radio format that had been so receptive to post-grunge acts in 2001 and 2002 was contracting as listener habits evolved, and as the musical culture was moving toward the emo and alternative sounds that would define mid-2000s rock radio. The band continued in various configurations through the 2000s, with lineup changes and independent releases that found smaller audiences than the peak had suggested. Dallas Smith subsequently had a successful career as a country artist in Canada, releasing a string of country chart hits through the 2000s and establishing himself as one of the more commercially successful Canadian country artists of that decade, a career trajectory that runs parallel to Darius Rucker's and is equally unlikely from the outside. Number 4. Puddle of Mudd. Puddle of Mudd arrived in 2001 on the same post-grunge wave that elevated Creed and Nickelback, with their major label debut, Come Clean, producing the singles Blurry, She Hates Me, and Control, the kind of multi-format rock radio success that defined mainstream rock in the early 2000s. The album was produced by Nirvana producer Butch Vig's former associate and released on Interscope, with significant label backing and industry infrastructure behind it. Wes Scantlin's raw, emotionally direct vocal delivery and the band's stripped-down approach differentiated them somewhat from the more polished contemporaries working in the same commercial lane. Come Clean sold approximately 3 million copies in the United States and established the band as a credible commercial force in the post-grunge format. Life on Display, 2003, followed with reasonable commercial performance and the hit Away From Me, though without the breakthrough impact of Come Clean. Famous, 2007, and Volume 4, Songs in the Key of Love and Hate, 2009, tracked the standard commercial decline curve as mainstream rock radio itself contracted and the specific sonic era that had made Come Clean successful became less commercially central. What distinguishes Puddle of Mudd's story from a standard commercial decline narrative is the visibility of Wes Scantlin's personal difficulties. Substance abuse issues, documented legal incidents across multiple jurisdictions, and erratic live performance behavior, including notable shows in which Scantlin appeared visibly incapacitated, circulated widely online through the 2000s in a way that conflated the band's public identity with his personal struggles. The situation created a dynamic in which the band could not maintain conventional touring and promotional activity because the unpredictability of any given performance became part of the story. Scantlin has spoken publicly about his struggles in various contexts, and the situation is genuinely one of personal difficulty rather than simply professional dysfunction. The answer to What Happened to Puddle of Mudd is partly about music industry dynamics and partly about something much more personal. Number 3, Collective Soul. Collective Soul had a specific moment of cultural relevance in the mid-1990s that has been somewhat obscured by how the decade's rock history tends to be narrated. The story is usually told through grunge, Britpop, and the emergence of alternative rock as a commercial format, with less attention to the bands like Collective Soul who occupied the mainstream post-grunge rock radio space during that period, without the critical apparatus taking much interest in them. The band, Ed Roland, Ross Childress, Dean Roland, Will Turpin, and Shane Evans, originally self-produced their first album, Hints, Allegations, and Things Left Unsaid, 1993, and distributed it regionally in the southeastern United States before Atlantic Records signed them, based on the success of the lead single, Shine, on regional radio. Shine broke nationally in 1994 and became a significant mainstream rock radio hit, which is a genuinely unusual origin story for a band that went on to have a substantial commercial run. The self-titled second album, Collective Soul, 1995, produced a further run of radio singles, December, The World I Know, and Gel, that sustained the band's commercial presence through the mid-1990s. Discipline Breakdown, 1997, and Dosage, 1999, maintained a working commercial profile without the breakout impact of the first two albums. What is interesting about Collective Soul's subsequent trajectory is its relative lack of drama. They did not have a notorious public breakup. They did not descend into the kind of personal difficulties that complicated other bands' stories. They continued working, releasing albums, 7-Year Itch, Greatest Hits, 2000, Youth, 2004, From the Ground Up, 2004, Afterwards, 2007, Rabbit, 2009, See What You Started by Continuing, 2015, and Blood, 2017. Touring consistently, maintaining a professional operation. Ed Roland has described the band's approach as building for long-term viability rather than chasing commercial peaks. The result is a band that is significantly less famous than it was in 1995, but that is, in the practical sense, still operating. Number 2, Live.
The angel closes her eyes.
Live, the Pennsylvania rock band consisting of Ed Kowalczyk, Chad Taylor, Patrick Dahlheimer, and Chad Gracie, had one of the most sonically distinctive presences in mid-1990s alternative rock. Throwing Copper, 1994, reached number 1 on the Billboard 200 and went 8 times platinum in the United States, producing the singles Lightning Crashes, I Alone, and Selling the Drama that were inescapable on alternative and mainstream rock radio in 1994 and 1995. The album also produced a deep cut that became a generational radio staple, lightning crashes, in particular, connected with a specific emotional register that the band's contemporaries were not accessing in the same way. What distinguished Live from many of their contemporaries was the evident seriousness of Ed Kowalczyk's lyrical ambitions. The spiritual searching, the philosophical inquiry, the attempt to engage with questions of consciousness and transcendence through rock music's conventional emotional vocabulary made the band compelling to an audience that wanted something denser than surface-level emotional content. It also made them resistant to the critical dismissal that more purely commercial post-grunge acts received, because the ambition was genuinely evident even when the execution was uneven. Mental Jewelry, 1991. Throwing Copper, 1994. Secret Samadhi, 1997. The Distance to Here, 1999. V, 2001. Birds of Prey, 2003. And Songs from Black Mountain, 2006. Constitute a full and productive catalog. Through this period, the band maintained a working professional operation and a genuine audience without the kind of spectacular commercial peak and collapse that defined other bands of their era. The band's coherence as a commercial entity was damaged when Kowalczyk departed in 2009. The stated reasons were creative and personal differences. The other three members continued using the Live name as they held the legal right to do recording and touring. The angel opens her eyes. Kowalczyk toured separately, performing the catalog material under his own name. The resulting confusion, two entities with competing claim to the Live identity, diluted the band's presence in a way that the formal split had not. The legal and personal dispute took years to resolve. The reconciliation came in 2017, when the original four members announced they were reuniting and working together again. The reunion stabilized the situation and produced new music, but the window of active cultural relevance had closed during the years of division. The band's catalog, however, has maintained streaming engagement in ways that confirm the emotional connection the songs established in the 1990s remains active for the people who first heard them then. As Kowalczyk described the period, there was a real loss there, not just commercially, but in terms of what we'd built together. You don't recover from that kind of thing cleanly. Number 1. Lifehouse. Desperate for changing. Lifehouse is the number 1 entry because their story contains the most compressed version of everything this list is about. A massive breakout hit that created expectations the band couldn't sustain, a creative identity that became confused in the attempt to sustain them, and a trajectory from one of the most played songs of their era to the status of a band that many people can name but cannot currently tell you what happened to. Hanging by a Moment, from the 2000 album No Name Face, spent 20 consecutive weeks at number 1 on the Billboard Hot Adult Top 40 chart and was the most played song on radio in 2001. That is not a small achievement. It represented a genuine connection between the band's sound and a mass audience. Jason Wade's vocal delivery, the song's specific emotional directness, and the production placed it at the center of the early 2000s post-grunge mainstream that was dominating rock radio. The follow-up album, Stanley Climbfall, 2002, was received poorly by critics and audiences compared to No Name Face, which is the standard experience for acts whose debut establishes expectations they cannot immediately meet. The band regrouped and released Lifehouse, 2005, Smoke and Mirrors, 2010, Almeria, 2012, and Out of the Wasteland, 2015, a productive recording pace that demonstrated professional commitment but did not reestablish the commercial prominence of Hanging by a Moment. I'm standing here until you make me move. The truth behind Lifehouse's trend is a common one. a band that arrived at the perfect commercial moment for their sound, built an identity around that moment, and found that the moment passed while they were still trying to recreate it. The approach of continuing to make music within the same sonic framework that produced the initial success, reasonable, professionally sensible, did not generate the cultural momentum that would have required a more significant artistic reinvention. The audience that loved hanging by a moment found the band's subsequent albums familiar rather than exciting. And familiarity without surprise is not what sustains careers at the top level. 10 bands, some genuinely gone, some still operating at smaller scale, some in ongoing disputes about who owns the name, one navigating a contested future after the death of its defining voice. The common thread across most of them is not one catastrophic failure, but a slower drift between the band they were and the band the audience needed them to keep being, between the commercial moment that made them and the changed landscape they were releasing music into afterward. The ones that survived that drift with the least damage were the ones that either genuinely evolved or accepted the catalog relationship gracefully. The ones that suffered most were the ones that kept trying to recapture the specific thing that had made them popular the first time, in conditions that no longer supported it. These are the 10 bands nobody's listening to anymore. And here's the truth behind the trend. Hit that like button and subscribe. More content like this coming.